Oh, hello, and welcome to another fun filled edition of Adam's Music Box. It is, in fact, the Sunday stream. And for millions of people around the world, it is the beginning of the NFL season. Well, technically, that was Thursday, but it's the first NFL Sunday of the year. And this not being a sports show, will let the prognostication go to our friendly folks in Las Vegas and elsewhere. But music has always been a very important part of any sporting event, going back to the gladiators of ancient Rome. But in many ways, the NFL has been a pioneer in integrating multiple forms of art and other multimedia extravaganzas into a sporting event. And so today I want to talk about the various ways that music has always been associated with the NFL. Now, the earliest form of music associated with the NFL is actually the least interesting. And this is something that was borrowed from collegiate sports, from NCAA, or what became NCAA sports. And this is the fight song. Now, the older the NFL team, the more old school the fight song. So, for instance, one of the oldest fight songs in the world, which you still sometimes hear today, not in the world, but in terms of the NFL, it's Bear Down by the Chicago Bears. There was one called Go You Packers Go, because they were also a very old team, and that's kind of been phased out. But one of the ones that, at least until recently, you used to hear a lot was the one associated with the Washington Redskins, which of course was hailed to the Redskins. And I think the reason that this fight song has sort of lost it into an era when many of the older fight songs were replaced is because it's actually a good tune with very memorable lyrics. I mean, they used to have a full on, I mean, many NFL teams had a full on marching band, because while baseball and basketball and hockey are more associated with the organ, the concert, the sort of theater organ that they would install in these arenas and stadiums, companies like Wurlitzer. The NFL wasn't so much of an organ music event, but more of a marching band event. And when you look, for instance, at the Redskins games from the 80s and early 90s, when they were on their generational run with Joe Gibbs as the coach, you would actually see a live marching band. And even into the 80s and early 90s, a lot of other teams had that too. And again, these fight songs that almost every team had, particularly the pre-war teams, the teams that originated before the war, they had these traditional marching band songs. But the NFL actually was associated with many other kinds of music, including music I find really interesting and really good. And to understand the origin of the next type of music I want to talk about, you have to go to the early 1960s, when something called NFL Films was created. Now, prior to the 1950s, if you wanted to see any sporting event, you had to go to the event. And occasionally, for big prolific events, you could see portions, you could see highlights in a movie theater, in a cinema, because before the main attraction, they would show not only previews, but they would show newsreels, they would show cartoons, and they would show highlights of sporting events. And that was really the only way that you could see these games before the advent of television. But in the 50s and 60s, television came into being, and the NFL straight away had a very good love affair with television. And the reason for that, many have surmised, this isn't my thought, but others have said this, is the shape of the game, the rectangular shape of the game, and the way that it moves down the field is sort of tailor made for television. And I think that television was a major part of the NFL gradually becoming the most popular sport in North America, compared to baseball, which before the late 60s, early 70s, when the shift started to happen, baseball was obviously number one, a much older sport. Now, in 1962, a company was formed, a film production company was formed called NFL Films, and it was a visionary man called Ed Sable who formed it. Now, why is this important? Most sports leagues and sports teams relied on the mass media to create visual elements, visual reportage of their games. And this, as I said, in the pre-television days would have been the newsreel companies. In the days of television, it would have been the networks, and on top of that, the local affiliates that would broadcast highlights of the game. And of course, people could see the game live. But when it came to dramatic recaps, there was really nothing more than the local newsman saying, well, this happened, and then that happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And now for the weather, it's cold. NFL Films wanted to elevate the reportage of the games and turn it into something dramatic, turn it into something cinematic. And they really accomplished this, I think, better than anyone could have ever imagined. And they did it in the following way. As NFL Films grew, they had multiple camera angles. They had slow motion. They had all sorts of dramatic shots that might not be the most accurate way to report on a game compared to just the straight ahead television footage, but it made it feel like you were watching a dramatic event. It made it feel as if you were watching a scripted movie. And I'm careful to use that word scripted because a lot of people think that the NFL is all fake. And I don't know. I think a lot of stuff is fake. A lot of stuff in this world is fake. But I think the powers that be have many more important things to rig than the NFL. So I use that term to describe the visual elements and the visuals directorial style that Ed Sable and his son Steve pioneered in NFL Films. Now, it wasn't just the great camera angles, there was also the wonderful narration. And in the early days, it was a man named John Facenda who created that narration. He was a newscaster, a local but very well-loved newscaster in Philadelphia, and he had this deep, dramatic voice. And it made NFL Films in its first 30 years. I mean, you'll know the voice when you hear it. The Lions were down by 3 points and the 2-minute warning. I mean, I don't really do the voice, but you'll know it when you hear it. Just Google John Facenda and you'll know exactly what I mean. So you have the camera angles, you have the dramatic narration. What's missing? The music. And boy, did they ever have music. They had an in-house library of original music scored by really interesting contemporary composers, the most famous of which was a man called Sam Spence. Now, in his later years, Sam Spence had some disputes with the NFL, but I always say give the composers what they're due. So there was something controversial going on there. But from the mid 60s until the 1990s, Sam Spence was such a prolific composer who created so many of those memorable soundtracks that people would hear on shows like Inside the NFL and all of these other recaps that the NFL Films company would produce. By the time you had NFL Films, you really didn't have this stuff shown at a cinematic level, although I think it would have really worked on the big screen. But even on television, the fact that it was in film and not video, 16 millimeter for your average game, 35 millimeter for your more important game, the narration, the music, and every team had their annual yearbook, which was a usually 30-minute or so recap of the prior year with a little preview of the following year. Now, Sam Spence's style was absolutely perfect. On the one hand, it was sort of neo-romantic classical music, sort of, if you will, but it also combined that with a lot of military band, concert band music, elements of the marching band genre, elements of jazz, elements of popular music. There was a lot of quotation in Sam Spence's music. And what quotation means in the context of instrumental music is that you're referencing a well-known song. You have it in jazz all the time, where let's say in the middle of a solo, a saxophonist will throw in a melody line from a well-known pop song. It's sort of a sense of inserting humor and signposts into music. And Sam Spence was absolutely brilliant at that. And you can hear that in many cases he was directly influenced by a lot of composers like Rimsky-Korsakov. You can hear a lot of him in there. Traditional English sea shanties, traditional Americana, whether it's John Philip Sousa or other folk songs. And of all of the things that he composed, one of the most iconic is one that sort of supplanted the old fashioned fight song for a team that was always very much more on the cutting edge than the teams that relied on old fashioned fight songs. And this was the Raiders, the wonderful Raiders, the team that was absolutely revolutionary in terms of not only their play on the field, but in terms of their organization and in terms of their branding. And what's branding without a song? Well, in 1974, Sam Spence composed a song for the Raiders, and it was accompanied by a poem written by Ed Sable. I believe it was Ed Sable who wrote it. It was narrated by John Facenda, and it was called The Autumn Wind. And it begins with that famous line, "The autumn wind is a pirate." And it was at this moment that I think there was a light bulb moment for NFL teams, which let them know that they could actually modernize their theme songs and sort of get away from the sort of late 19th century style fight songs. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And like I said, the Redskins were able to hang on to their fight song in particular for a long time. But for some of the newer teams and for younger audiences, they wanted something more dramatic or at least something more fun. And in composing his Raiders theme song, Sam Spence really delivered on both. It's a really good piece of music. It's incredibly memorable, whether it's played as an instrumental or whether it's combined with the poem. And like I said, that got a lot of teams thinking. Now, the late 70s and 80s saw another big trend in music to do with the NFL. And this was NFL teams releasing what best could be referred to as novelty songs. Now, the most famous one of all was from 1985, and this was the Super Bowl Shuffle, which was a hip hop song. And most of these, not all, and we'll get to that in a minute, but most of these were hip hop. The 80s was the decade when hip hop became something that the world became familiar with, even though it had roots in the 70s. And in 1985, the Bears were on a huge run. They only lost one game to the Dolphins, and they did this song that was a bit braggadocio, but it was just a lot of fun for the spectators. I don't know what Mike Ditka felt about it. He certainly wasn't in it, and if you've ever heard him sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," a baseball song, you'll probably know why. But a lot of teams followed suit. The following year, the LA Rams, the Eric Dickerson era, did their hip hop song "Ram It." In 1984, this song didn't really travel as far, but there was "We're the 49ers," one of these sorts of popular music songs. And even going into the 90s, the Redskins, who were on top of the world in 1991, Joe Gibbs, like I said, that era still. They did the Redskins rap, and the Miami Dolphins in the early 90s with Marino still going strong. They did their own sort of send up of MC Hammer's favorite song, which is called "Touch Us." There were also other attempts at modernizing songs. At the very end of the 70s, the Chargers commissioned a sort of a funk song called "San Diego Superchargers," with LA session musicians providing that role, which is another example of a newer team playing newer music. And for those who don't know the history of these things, when I say newer team, obviously various teams have been added to the NFL over the years. But in 1960, there was a brand new league, and this was the AFL. And this was sort of the startup league that was going to challenge the old guard. By the beginning of the 70s, the two leagues had merged. And the AFC teams, you had your Houston Oilers, your Kansas City Chiefs. They used to be the Dallas Texans. That's another story. You had the Oakland Raiders. You had the LA and then San Diego Chargers. You had the Miami Dolphins. You had the Buffalo Bills. And again, these were sort of the newer teams, but even some of them adopted some of the traditional fight songs. But in Buffalo, for instance, while we're on that, they were one of the teams that really embraced sort of an existing song in the popular music realm, and they made it their own. And it's a version of the early Isley Brothers hit "Shout," which is and has been for a while a big thing for the Buffalo Bills. There was a parody of "Rhinestone Cowboy" in the 70s for the Steelers. So instead of like a rhinestone cowboy, like a Pittsburgh Steeler, Terry Bradshaw tried to sing it at one time. That is a very exciting, if you are so inclined. In the 90s, you saw the Dolphins try to do their version of an MC Hammer tune, but it was actually the Atlanta Falcons which captured the heart of MC Hammer. Because even though he was from Northern California, the Falcons in the early 90s were going through something of a rebrand. And the Atlanta music scene, hip hop and all, was really growing at that time. And MC Hammer was frequently pictured on the sidelines of Falcons games. Deion Sanders, who was a Falcon at that time, was a big friend of his. So that's yet another instance of this. In the 90s, the Green Bay Packers adopted, and this is kind of a weird one because when you think of odd time signatures and complex chord progressions, you don't think of something that fans can cheer along with. But the Green Bay Packers in the Favre era began adopting the Todd Rundgren song, one of his more straightforward songs, albeit Bang on the Drum All Day, as their touchdown anthem. And many other teams have since followed suit with that song and with others. The LA Rams, for instance, use Dr. Dre as their touchdown anthem because obviously he's someone very much associated with the locale. Also in the 80s, I'm jumping around a lot, but I'm trying to paint a picture, people. I'm trying to, paint a picture. You'll understand. In the 1980s, the Raiders had a very interesting moment of outside help with their brand. Now, again, the Raiders are an unusual team because the Davis family, and Al Davis in particular, has always said that the Raiders aren't really associated with any one place the way that many teams are. They're associated with a lifestyle, with an identity. And that's why when he moved them from Oakland to LA in the 80s and then back to Oakland in the 90s and now to Vegas, he said that doesn't really matter. The fans are with the identity. And I actually think that time has now proven him right. His son, Mark, is now in charge, but Al was, the Mac Daddy, if you will, of that team. Now, in the late 1980s, a lot of West Coast rap groups started wearing Raider uniforms and hats and other paraphernalia. And this was particularly associated with NWA, though others, Ice-T, wore his share of Raiders adjacent paraphernalia. And of all the guys in NWA, the one who really loved football and really had always loved the Raiders, even going back to the days of Ken Stabler and John Madden and those people in Oakland, was Ice Cube. Now, since then, Ice Cube has become a kind of spokesperson for the Raiders. He's written several songs that are played at Raider games. He appears very frequently in the stadium. And he's someone that, again, he sort of proved Al Davis right. Because whether they were in LA, whether they were in Oakland, whether they were in Las Vegas, Ice Cube has maintained his loyalty to the team. And he has been, as an artist, someone who has contributed to this Raiders brand by writing songs about the team and performing these songs at the games. So even more than MC Hammer's association with the Falcons, Ice Cube's association with the Raiders has, if anything, grown stronger sort of every decade since the late 80s, when he was seen on music video channels throughout the world wearing Raider gear. And there's even a reference to that in the 2015 bioepic Straight Out of Compton. So let's see, I've just jotted a few things down. A lot of other songs that are sort of well-known are played at other stadiums. So, for instance, the Steelers in the contemporary era use the song Renegade, or have used the song Renegade by Styx as their touchdown song, the same way that Green Bay uses Todd Rundgren. There's even though the Vikings are one of the new-ish NFL teams coming in the early 60s, right around the same time as the Cowboys, with their, again, very well-known song Stampede. In later years, the Vikings adopted Let's Go Crazy by Prince, because Prince himself was a native of the area, and much like the Vikings are all about purple, so too was Prince. So I don't know if that was intentional or not, but hey, that's where you go. Fly, Eagles, Fly by the Eagles is another example of an older chant, an older fight song that is still with us. And for a while, the Miami Dolphins adopted a lot of Jimmy Buffett because it went along with the lifestyle of a team that once had an actual live dolphin tank in there. Hootie and the Blowfish mentioned the Miami Dolphins in several of their songs because I believe Darius Rutger is their fan. And of course, then we have to talk about the halftime show. Now, in the first sort of 20 years of the Super Bowl, the biggest of all NFL games since its inception in the late 1960s, the Super Bowl halftime show were actually mainly marching bands in their early years, and then a few sort of classic pop singers, a few singers kind of on their way down. And there were some exceptions, but it was in the early 90s when this really changed. Because the NFL said instead of having sort of choirs like Up With People or magic shows, they had a guy in the 80s called Elvis Presto, or have marching bands, the United Way and their bands and choirs. They said that we really need to up it and give some celebrity firepower involved. And so in the early 90s, they decided, let's have the biggest superstar in the world, none other than Michael Jackson. And that changed the notion of the Super Bowl halftime show forever, because it went from something that a lot of big artists didn't want to play because they considered it something for has-beens. They considered it a bit hokey because you might be singing a good old song with a marching band and they didn't want to be associated with it. It changed it from that kind of reputation to one of the biggest entertainment spectacles in the world. And in many ways, Michael Jackson's show was still one of the best ever. It had the effects, it had the staging, it had the medley of songs, and it had that famous moment where, much to the angst of all of the producers of the show who were selling commercials for a lot of money, Michael Jackson just stood there watching the crowd, not singing and not saying anything. And the audience loved it. The tension was building. What's he going to do? When's he going to sing? What's going on? And then, after far too long for the NFL producers and the TV producers for their happiness, he gave the cue to start the music, which is removing his glasses. And from there on out, this Super Bowl spectacle was forever changed. And now it's sort of a huge, larger than life event. There was the big one with Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg and Eminem in LA a few years back. Beyonce has done huge ones. Big rock bands have done it. The Who, U2, Bon Jovi. And so now sort of anyone who's everyone wants to be there. And the artists don't even get paid. It's basically a commercial for the artists. And there's some rumors, I do believe they're true, that the artists actually need to pay for the privilege. So again, it's like they are buying commercial time, which is kind of true because it is the highest rated single day of now streaming and broadcast in the world. So that's another way that music is involved. Now, another reason that I think music and the NFL have become, very good partners is because the NFL is a game, professional football, gridiron football, I should say, has a lot of breaks. The plays are not continuous. You have to, reset at the line of scrimmage before every play. There are timeouts. There are 2-minute warnings. There are breaks between the quarters. Again, breaks between the quarters and half times aren't really unusual. But the fact that, unlike, let's say, hockey, soccer, basketball, where the play is continuous, and even baseball, there isn't really much downtime between pitches. The setting up between plays at the new line of scrimmage is something that takes time. And what do they fill this time with in the stadiums? Well, they used to fill it with marching bands. Increasingly, they fill it with music. All of the NFL stadiums will have music licenses, and all sorts of popular music from rock and roll to hip hop will be played during this downtime in the game. So that is yet another reason and another way that the NFL has always had a very close relationship with the world of music. So, I think we covered most of the bases there, even though that would be a baseball reference. So, without further ado, if you're into the NFL, enjoy it. If not, then just leave your nasty comments below, which I probably won't read, but there you go. If you leave an interesting comment, though, I will, of course, read it. And as always, like, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Oh, before I go, I did forget another one. Monday Night Football. We cannot forget that. So, Monday Night Football was one of the first regular telecasts of the NFL to really they went above and beyond in terms of what they did for production. more camera angles, more interesting characters in the booth, and also better music. The original theme song for the first 5 years is a really funky number called Score by a group of session musicians called Bob's Band. And this followed up with a song that is still used in one shape or form on Monday Night Football, even though it's no longer a network show. And that is a great song called Heavy Action by Johnny Pearson. Johnny Pearson, along with Sam Spence, also did some music for NFL films. And since then, all of the other networks have competed for who has the best theme song. In the 90s, when Fox got the NFL, Fox being the startup network, got the NFL for the first time, they hired out a composer to write a very, very dramatic song, da 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 da. And that said, well, hang on, we had a lot of happy songs before, but maybe we're entering the era of dramatic music. And now you can even go to YouTube and find people, voting between which broadcaster has the best intro music. So again, that's another interesting facet of this. And it all really started when Monday Night Football had some really memorable music as their theme songs when they were at their peak in the 70s and 80s. So, like I said, subscribe. We will see you next time. Take care.